I'm not the kind of person who believes in curses, haunted places, or any of that creepypasta nonsense, but after what happened in that forest, I stopped laughing at those stories, because now I understand why some people never make it back to tell theirs. It started like any other spontaneous trip, 3 friends, me, Katya, and Vlad, packing half-prepped gear, some energy drinks, and a half-dead drone into the trunk of a beat-up Skoda, heading straight into the Carpathians with a plan that was barely more than, explore, film, don't die. The first day was calm, maybe even too calm, like the forest itself was waiting to exhale. There was no wind, no birdsong, just this weird buzzing in the air like when a storm's about to roll in, except there were no clouds. We joked about it. Vlad said it felt like we were walking into a cut scene, and I remember laughing, but now when I think back on it, I realize that was the exact moment we crossed into something we weren't supposed to find. It was Katya who spotted it first, a glint of metal in a bed of moss under an old pine, so deeply sunken into the forest floor it looked like it had been waiting there for years, maybe decades. She bent down and brushed away the leaves with her sleeve, revealing the warped, mud-splattered shape of a smartphone. It was cold to the touch, like it had never seen sunlight, but somehow the screen was still alive, faintly glowing with a dull light through spiderweb cracks. I expected it to be completely dead, just a relic swallowed by the woods, but then the screen lit up fully, 1% battery, no SIM card, and a single unread message notification sitting quietly at the top. Whoever lost this thing must have dropped it today, I muttered, but even as I said it, something in my chest tightened. We were miles from any road, at least an hour from the nearest marked trail, and yet this phone was here, freshly blinking like it had just been unlocked. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. The second was worse. The notification preview said, "Don't let him follow you." At first, Vlad thought we'd stumbled onto someone's horror scavenger hunt or some TikTok challenge gone wrong. "Watch, there's probably a hidden GoPro up in that tree," he laughed, spinning around with his arms wide like we were the stars of a prank show. But Katya was dead silent, staring at the lock screen with this pale, sunken look I didn't like. "Guys," she finally whispered, "that's us." And she pointed at the background image on the phone, blurry, taken from a distance, slightly tilted like the angle of a crouched photographer. It was us. Me in my red hoodie, Katya tying her shoelace, Vlad mid-laugh. The trees behind us matched exactly where we were standing. The photo had been taken today, from inside the forest, from a spot none of us had walked. That was the moment it hit me, we weren't alone. We never had been. I remember the exact moment I tapped the notification, my thumb hesitated over the screen for maybe 2 seconds, but my breath had already stopped, and the sound of the forest around us went so silent it was almost painful, like the whole world was holding its breath along with me. The screen flickered, loading slowly like it was resisting me, and when the message finally opened, the first thing I noticed wasn't the text itself, but the name at the top. It didn't say, "unknown number." It didn't say, +380 or anything normal. It said, "ME," all caps, no photo, just that word glowing in a cold white font above a single line of text, "Don't let him follow you." That was it. No sender details, no history, no context, just those 6 words, written as if whoever sent them already knew exactly where we were and what was about to happen. Vlad snorted and muttered something about how it was probably some kind of abandoned ARG, maybe a forest-themed escape room planted by YouTubers hoping we'd make it go viral. But Katya didn't laugh. She just whispered, "Then why is it still on 1%? What happened next doesn't feel real, not in the way dreams don't feel real, but in the way trauma blurs things, makes them bend at the edges, warp like heat over asphalt." The phone vibrated in my hand, once, soft but sharp, like a pinprick, and the message disappeared. Not just cleared from the screen, but deleted, erased without a trace. No logs, no drafts, no way to reopen it. We stood there in silence, and then Katya stepped back and whispered, "Something's wrong." I looked up from the phone and followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it. Behind the trees, just barely visible through the underbrush, stood a man, tall, motionless, skin pale and stretched like bark. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But he was staring straight at us with eyes that were far too wide and far too white, and even though he was at least 20 meters away, I swear to God I could hear his breathing, slow, ragged, wet like lungs full of rot. I wanted to run, my instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were buried in the forest floor, held down by something heavy and unseen, like roots had grown up through the soil and coiled around my ankles the second I opened that message. Vlad didn't seem to notice the man at all, he was too busy laughing, trying to play it cool, saying something about us freaking out over a ghost story. But Katia grabbed my arm, hard, and I'll never forget how her nails dug into my skin. "He's not blinking," she whispered, voice trembling so bad I could barely understand her. "Why isn't he blinking?" Then the phone vibrated again. New message. No sound. Just a banner sliding quietly across the top of the screen, "Don't speak. He's listening." I looked up, and the man was gone. I don't remember tapping the screen again, maybe I did it out of some twisted need to feel control, maybe I thought there would be something inside that would explain what we saw, some kind of rational clue, like coordinates or names or an old message thread that would expose the whole thing as an elaborate prank, but what I opened wasn't a folder or an app. It was the gallery. At first, it looked like a typical camera roll, hundreds of photos lined up in neat little squares, dates sorted across weeks, months, even years, most of them too blurry to make out from the preview, like the lens had been smeared with grease or scratched by something hard. But as I scrolled, slowly, with my thumb trembling against the screen, the photos became clearer. Sharper. Like they wanted to be seen. And that's when I noticed it. In frame after frame, we were in them. Not just today's photos, not just from the hike, but from last night at the motel, from the gas station we stopped at in Lviv, from the inside of our car while we were sleeping, even one of Vlad adjusting the drone bag by the side of the road. Photos none of us took. Angles none of us could have seen from. I could hear Katia whispering behind me, small, choked fragments like, "No, no, that's not possible," and, "How did it get these?" And every time she said something, I felt my skin crawl, not just from the words themselves, but from this growing pressure in the back of my head, like something unseen was leaning over my shoulder, watching us look through what didn't belong to us. Then I reached the last row of photos. I should have stopped. God, I should have stopped. But I tapped. I opened the final image. It wasn't a selfie, or a group shot, or some distant stalker frame. It was a wide, high-angle shot, like a drone photo taken straight from above, showing the three of us lying in the forest clearing, unmoving, limbs bent in unnatural ways, eyes open and glassy, blood pooling around our heads like black flowers. Katia gasped. Vlad went silent. And then the phone vibrated again. New photo. It appeared right before our eyes, another shot, nearly identical to the one before it, but this time, we weren't alone. At the very edge of the frame, just inside the tree line, nearly hidden in the blur, stood the man from before. Only now, he was closer. And he wasn't standing still. He was smiling. No teeth, just this horrible stretched grimace, like someone had carved it into his face with wire. Then, without me touching anything, the gallery began auto-scrolling backwards, fast and violent, skipping through hundreds of images until it landed on one dated next week, 7 days from now. It was a black screen with red text in the center, like a warning label burned into the image itself. It said, "One of you has already left." Then the screen glitched, pixelated violently, and the phone powered off with a long, slow fade, as if it were falling asleep, satisfied. The moment the phone went black, it was like someone flipped a switch on the world around us. The air thickened, the shadows deepened, and even the trees seemed to lean in closer, like they'd been pretending to be normal all along but had finally gotten tired of the act. Katia whispered that we needed to get out, not later, not soon, but now, and I didn't argue, because every hair on my body was standing up, and the feeling in my gut wasn't just fear, it was something worse, something ancient, like I'd stumbled into a story that already knew how it ended. We packed up fast, even though we hadn't really unpacked, shoving gear into bags with shaking hands, Vlad dropping the drone case twice and swearing under his breath as Katya refused to touch the phone again. The clearing, which had felt spacious just minutes ago, suddenly seemed too small, like the trees were inching inward every time we blinked. I took one last glance at the spot where the man had been, just to be sure he was really gone, but the branches there seemed darker than the rest, unnaturally so, like something was still standing there, only we couldn't see it anymore. We started walking fast, not running, but close, following the trail the same way we'd come in just 2 hours earlier, or at least, we thought we were. But the deeper we moved, the less familiar everything looked, even though we hadn't veered off at all. It started small, a log that looked too old to be freshly fallen, a broken tree that should have been on our right but was now on our left, and then the worst one, we passed the same bent, rusted trail marker 3 times within 30 minutes. That marker had a nail sticking out of it at an odd angle, the kind of detail you don't forget, and each time we saw it again, the blood drained from our faces just a little more. Katya was the first to say it, "We're not moving forward." I wanted to deny it, to blame the fog or the low light or the panic, but I couldn't, because the map on my phone had stopped working, and even my compass app spun in circles like it had lost its mind. Vlad tried to joke it off again, something about Slender Man or cursed TikTok filters, but even he didn't believe himself anymore. Especially after we started hearing footsteps that didn't match ours. I'm not talking about distant echoing or the forest playing tricks. I mean footsteps in sync with ours, 4 pairs, sometimes 5, never 3. At first, we stopped and looked around. Then we started testing it, stepping at odd intervals, jumping suddenly, even stopping completely, and every time, the sound continued for just a beat too long before mirroring us again. That's when Katya looked at Vlad, dead serious, and said something I'll never forget. "When you were gone earlier, when you disappeared for a minute, did you see something?" He blinked. Swallowed. And then, slowly, almost like it hurt him to admit it, he said, "I wasn't gone. I've been with you the whole time." But he had been gone. I remembered it clearly. We both did. And just like that, we realized something even worse: one of us might not be who we think they are. We were walking fast, nearly jogging, and still, the trail kept folding back on itself like we were trapped inside a maze that reassembled behind us every time we turned our backs. But what broke me wasn't the looping paths or the static that started quietly bleeding from my phone speakers. It was the light. The sun was gone. Not fading, not setting, gone, as if someone had hit a light switch for the sky. One second we were under golden evening sun, the next we were in this oily, unnatural twilight, the kind you see just before a storm or in dreams that turn violent. Katya pulled out her phone and hissed that it was only 4:46 p.m., but I swear it felt like midnight, and the woods around us had turned to silhouettes, no wind, no bugs, just thick, wet silence and the distant sound of something moving, not crashing like a bear or trotting like a deer, but dragging, slow, patient, like it had all the time in the world. I looked at Vlad, expecting some snarky comment, but he was staring into the trees with this blank, hollow expression, eyes unfocused, mouth slightly open, like he was listening to something none of us could hear. That's when we saw it, a wooden post up ahead, rising crooked from the ground, maybe man-made, maybe not, splintered at the top like lightning had struck it years ago and left it half dead. Something was carved into the wood, not with a knife, but scratched violently, like someone had clawed it in with raw fingers. The words were uneven, smeared with dried brown crust, but still legible, "No way back for the curious." At first I thought it was a warning, maybe part of an old hiking route someone had tried to shut down, but when I stepped closer, I realized the bark was fresh, peeled recently, maybe within the last few hours. The air got colder near the post. Not wind-chill cold, hollow cold, the kind you feel at funerals or inside churches you know you shouldn't be in. Then Vlad walked up beside me, looked at the words, and whispered, in a voice that was not quite his, "It didn't say that last time." Katia and I turned to him so fast we nearly tripped over each other, and I swear the look on his face was wrong, not scared, not confused, but curious. Not his usual kind of curious. This was slow, fascinated, like something was waking up inside him. "What do you mean, last time?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level, but he didn't answer. Instead, he smiled, not a full smile, just this slight twitch at the corner of his mouth, and then looked down at his hands like he didn't recognize them. The shadows around us thickened. The dragging sound grew louder. And then the phone, the dead phone, vibrated again from inside my bag, even though I hadn't touched it. I pulled it out with numb fingers. It lit up. 1% battery. A new message on the lock screen. This time it didn't say, "Don't let him follow you." It said, "One of you isn't real." There are moments where silence doesn't feel like peace, it feels like pressure, like being watched by something that has never blinked, something that lives behind the walls of what we call real. That's exactly what that silence felt like when I read the new message, "One of you isn't real." The words didn't blink or fade or vanish like the others, they just stayed, staring back at me, like a cold eye pressed against the screen. My heart pounded so hard it felt like something was trying to punch its way out of my chest, and when I looked up from the phone, both Vlad and Katia were watching me, their faces twisted into the kind of expression you wear when you're trying not to look afraid but failing badly. I didn't say what it said at first, I couldn't. Instead, I asked the only question I could force out of my dry throat, "Does anyone feel wrong?" And I swear on everything, they both answered at the exact same time, "What do you mean?" And their voices overlapped so perfectly, so mechanically, that for one horrifying second I thought they were repeating each other. I backed away instinctively, and something in the forest shifted with me, a sharp crack like a twig snapping, only louder, heavier, like it came from the bones of the forest itself. The phone vibrated again, but I didn't look this time. I couldn't. Katia was shaking now, whispering that she felt sick, her hands trembling, her skin pale and sweating even though the air had turned icy. Vlad just stood there, watching her, but not with concern. With something else. His eyes weren't moving normally. They weren't scanning. They were tracking. Locked in. I took a slow step between them, trying to keep my voice calm, but inside I was screaming. Then something unbelievable happened. The phone lit up on its own and switched to the camera. It wasn't facing outward. It was facing me. And on the screen, I saw two figures standing behind me. Not Katia and Vlad. These were taller. Darker. Blurred and trembling like static, but watching with unmistakable faces. My face. Twice. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just the trees, blacker than before, breathing wind that carried no sound. I turned back, and both Katia and Vlad were staring at me now, not blinking, not speaking, just frozen like puppets caught mid-movement. The phone flickered, then buzzed again. A new message appeared without being opened. I didn't touch it. No one did. But it wrote itself across the screen in that same mechanical, deliberate font, only two make it out. Choose. And then, for the first time, the battery icon went up. Not down. From 1% to 2%. As if something was feeding. There's a moment in every nightmare when you realize you've stopped trying to wake up, not because you don't want to, but because some part of you knows you never will. That's what it felt like when the phone, which none of us had touched again, vibrated and lit up on its own, showing a crude GPS map drawn in blood-red lines against a black background. There was no compass, no scale, no real terrain, just one spiraling route that curved inward like a snail shell, tighter and tighter, ending in a blinking red X labeled only "Last Chance." Katia begged us not to follow it. She said the spiral meant we'd never come back. But Vlad had already started walking, muttering something under his breath, and I'm still not sure what it was, but it sounded like a prayer in reverse, like syllables being chewed instead of spoken. I called his name 3 times, louder each time, and by the third, he didn't even flinch. That's when I noticed his shadow was no longer in sync with him, it moved faster, like it was leading him. We followed, because the alternative was staying in a place that no longer had direction, sound, or time. The deeper into the spiral we went, the more the forest changed, trees thinned out, but the darkness grew denser, the air tasted metallic, like electricity before lightning, and the ground became soft beneath our boots, not muddy but almost spongy, like something alive was just beneath the moss, breathing shallowly. Then we saw it, a tree unlike the rest, massive, black-barked, with a hollow at its base wide enough for a person to crawl into. Around its base, half buried in moss, were phones. Dozens of them. All cracked. All glowing faintly. Each one vibrating silently like a heartbeat. Katia stepped back. I stepped forward. And the phone in my hand buzzed again, harder this time, as if it were desperate to be felt. A new notification appeared, but this time it didn't just sit there. It opened itself. This is how it spreads. Katia screamed. Not a fear scream, a rage scream. She grabbed the phone from my hands and threw it at the tree with full force, and the second it hit the bark, all the other phones stopped vibrating. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. And then, from the hollow, a hand reached out, long, pale, dripping with black sap, its nails fused like bark, its fingers stretching too far, like joints had been unshackled. It grabbed Katia's ankle. She didn't even have time to scream again. One pull. One sickening snap. And she was gone. Dragged inside. The hollow sealed behind her like a wound closing. Vlad didn't react. He just turned to me with a flat, mechanical stare, and whispered, "Only one more." I stood there frozen, unable to speak, unable to scream, with my ears ringing and my chest heaving like I'd just run through a burning building. The tree had sealed itself shut, bark twisted back into place, perfectly smooth, no sign that anyone had ever been dragged through it. Katia was gone. I don't mean missing, I mean erased, like the forest had consumed her in the same way a fire eats oxygen, leaving nothing but silence and pressure in her place. Vlad was still watching me with that same hollow expression, not angry, not afraid, just empty, like something was wearing his face like a mask that didn't quite fit. He pointed at the phone, which had landed near the roots of the tree, screen still glowing. I hesitated, terrified that if I picked it up, I'd somehow become part of whatever had taken her, but when I finally did, my fingers moved like they belonged to someone else. The screen flickered once, then displayed something new, a list. A set of rules. No title, no menu, just 5 lines written in that cold white font. 1. The phone must be found. 2. The message must be read. 3. The spiral must be entered. 4. Only one may leave. 5. The phone must remain. As I read them, the text began to fade slowly, dissolving into the background like smoke caught in sunlight. I dropped the phone, expecting it to finally die, but instead, the battery jumped to 3%, pulsing in time with the pounding in my skull. And then the forest, the entire forest, seemed to breathe. I don't know how to explain it better than that. The trees leaned backward. The wind reversed. The air around us inhaled, as if the rules had been read aloud for the first time in years and the thing behind the spiral had just awakened to continue its game. That was the word that finally slid through my mind like a broken prayer, game. None of this was chaos. None of this was random. This was a ritual. And we'd followed every step, blindly, exactly, like every other group before us had. I turned to Vlad, and for one long second, he looked almost human again. His breathing was ragged, his pupils wide, his hands shaking slightly like he was fighting something inside himself. "It makes you forget," he whispered, "until it's your turn." Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a second phone, cracked, old, covered in dry moss. My heart stopped. It was the same phone we'd found. A copy? A decoy? A memory? I don't know. All I know is that when he held it up, the message on the screen read, "You found this once before." I took a step back, my knees buckling, and in that moment I realized the truth. I hadn't just found the phone. I'd left it. Left it for us. For me. Because that's what the game demands, someone always brings the phone back. I don't remember deciding to run. 1 second I was staring at Vlad holding that second phone, the same model, same screen crack, same cursed battery icon blinking at 3% like a pulse monitor, and the next, my legs were moving, crashing through the underbrush with such violent instinct that I didn't care about direction, pain, or the roots tearing at my ankles. Behind me, I heard Vlad call out once, but his voice didn't sound like his anymore. It was too close, and too far, all at once, like it came from inside my head, echoing off the edges of a dream I didn't know I was still trapped in. I ran for what felt like hours, maybe longer, the sky above flickering like a dying fluorescent light, shifting between deep black and pale gray with no stars, no moon, no concept of night or day. The trees began to change shape as I moved, distorting subtly, their branches bending toward me like fingers, twitching with hunger, the forest rearranging itself as I tried to break free from its pattern. Then, just as suddenly as it began, I stumbled into a clearing. A perfect circle. Quiet. Still. At the center stood a wooden post, familiar, but wrong, this time with a new message etched into the bark in something darker than dried blood. You chose to remember. I didn't understand at first. My lungs burned. My legs were jelly. I looked down at my hands, scraped, muddy, shaking. And then I saw it. A third phone. Half buried in the dirt at the base of the post, screen dark but pulsing faintly beneath the glass like something alive was trapped inside. I picked it up, unable to resist, knowing somehow this was the final step. The screen blinked. Battery, 4%. No passcode. One video file. Timestamped 7 days from today. Against every survival instinct in my body, I opened it. The footage was shaky, low quality, filmed on this same phone, but the voice speaking was mine. Desperate. Panicked. Crying. Whispering the same phrase over and over, "It never ends, it never ends, it never ends." Behind my voice, the camera slowly turned to reveal something else. A figure, tall, eyeless, mouth open too wide, filming me back. I dropped the phone, screamed, and backed away, but the trees had already closed in. The path was gone. My own footprints vanished behind me. That's when I saw the marker again, the very first one. The trail sign with the nail sticking out. Bent at the same angle. Only now the carving on it didn't say "No way back for the curious." It said, "Welcome back." And the final horror hit me like a needle sliding into my spine. I hadn't escaped. I'd just reached the beginning. Again. I don't know how long I sat there at the edge of that clearing, arms wrapped around my knees like a child, shaking so hard I thought my bones would crack beneath my skin. The forest had gone silent again, not quiet, but wrong, as if sound had been turned off altogether, like I was trapped in a paused video. No wind, no birds, not even my own breathing, just pressure in the air, like something immense was pressing down from above, watching to see what I would do next. The phone, the one I'd dropped, was still at my feet, glowing softly in the moss like an eye waiting to open. I knew what it wanted. I knew what it was. And I also knew, deep in my gut, that I was the last piece of the puzzle. The last move in the ritual. The final decision. I should have left it. I should have crushed it beneath my heel, screamed into the trees, clawed my way through the dirt until my fingernails snapped off, anything but what I did. But curiosity is a trap, and stories are worse than any monster, because they make you believe there's meaning. And so I picked it up. The battery was now at 5%, the screen fully lit, but this time there was no message, just the camera app open and recording. Not facing me. Facing outward. Toward you. For a long time, I didn't understand. But now I do. This wasn't my story. Not really. It was ours. Mine to pass along. Yours to read. Yours to finish. Yours to carry. Because that's the rule that never made the list. The final truth, hidden behind the rest, it doesn't stop until someone tells it. So I did. I told it. And now it's yours. That strange phone you found in the woods. That message you haven't opened. The dream you had last week of a face with no eyes and a mouth too wide. I know it felt real. Because it was. And if you made it this far, if you're still listening, then I'm sorry. I really am. But there's only one thing left to say. One last message. I saw it appear on the phone just before it turned black. 5 words. Not a warning. A command. Written for the next player in the spiral. Maybe you. Probably you. Leave it where they'll find it.